How many crazy myths have you heard about polyamory? Probably quite a few. So don't worry, we are going to spend the next, 10 to 15, maybe 20, because I talk a lot, minutes myth busting the top 5 most pervasive myths about polyamory that I come across in my work as a sex coach. Stay with me, we'll catch you soon. What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Stephanie J, the Erotic Alchemist, and I am so grateful to have you guys here with me today. Today, I think you can tell, I'm a little bit excited because I am really overhearing people talk to me about these 5 myths that come up all the time. And actually, probably when I sat down to make this list, I think I thought of like 25 questions about polyamory that I hear all the time. But we wanted to keep this short, we wanted to keep it sweet, and y'all know I have a habit of talking way too long. So we thought, let's start with 5. And then if there's more, if we've missed more that you think are relevant, let me know in the comments and we'll myth bust those too, okay? But let's stick with me for these 5 first, because these are the 5 that come up in my awareness the most often. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that they're probably the 5 you guys see the most as well. Okay. Number 1. Did anybody else I totally just got an image from Aladdin when the genie's like telling him the rules and he like pops up from the grave. Okay, squirrel moment. Don't worry about that. Let's pretend that never happened. Number 1. Bringing a person into a monogamous relationship will help fix problems that are in the relationship. Now, guys, I know that when I say it like this, it sounds a little silly already. You're kind of like, what? Why would that work? And yet, frequently in my practice, in my social life, in my friend circles, in my family circles, I see this all the time. Typically, it manifests as, couple A, like John and Sally, let's just say it's a heteronormative couple. John and Sally are not getting along. There's, let's say, differences in sexual needs. Sally has a really, really low sex drive. This is what I see all the time. Sally has a low sex drive. She's feeling really cold. She's feeling really numbed out, and she quite frankly just can't stand the sight of herself naked or her partner naked and doesn't want anything to do with any type of sexual intimacy whatsoever. Okay? That's Sally. Then we've got John. It was John, right? I think it was John. Okay. Then we got John over here, who has a really high sex drive and is feeling that personal touch is one of his love languages, and is feeling really, really hurt and unloved by this lack of connection from Sally. Now, what often happens here is because these two have tried to talk and they just frequently do not have the tools to meet each other, right? Like, this is a solvable situation because 9 times out of 10, what's happening is that Sally has some sexual trauma or relating trauma that is locking down her system. 9 times out of 10, that's what it is. And that's something that I help a lot of my clients with in my work. But if you don't have the ability to have that conversation and you don't know to look for a sex therapist, then you don't know that this can be fixed. But maybe there's kids, maybe there's house ownership, maybe there is a genuine love and a really strong value of lifetime partnership. And yet John still needs his needs to be met. And so what he does is they propose to go, either that he opens up the relationship and he goes and does, becomes poly or tries dating a few other people or has some single dates, and Sally's just going to stay at home. Or they decide to open up to another person, if woman or a man, to see if maybe that brings Sally out of her shell. In either situation, what ends up happening is that you are bringing another person into your relationship. You are bringing another human's energy into the energy that is already happening between John and Sally. Even if John never brings this other person home, even if John literally never mentions this person's name to Sally, we now have an energetic container where all 3 are sharing energy. Guaranteed. It's impossible for that to not happen. And what can happen here is, the new party has no idea what's going on between John and Sally, so doesn't know how to really relate to John properly, probably. And even if John is venting to the new person, he's only venting based on his perspective of the story, right? So it's venting, but you can't really help. And that can put the new person in a bit of a tough spot. In addition, what we have noticed is the second you add an additional energy into a relationship that already has traumas and already has struggles, the tendency is for that relationship to kind of explode just a little bit. And the reason for this is because now Sally is feeling insecure. She is very deeply aware that she's not meeting John's needs and that somebody else is. And that can feel very unsafe. And regardless of where that is felt in the body, Sally can retract more, Sally can become argumentative, Sally can become distrustful. There's a lot of things that can happen in Sally's being that say, hey, I have a value of monogamy, and her being has some level of trauma happening, and those things are not being addressed. They're not being met. And as a result of that, and she doesn't know these things, right? She's not going to be necessarily consciously aware of this, but this is what's happening energetically and unconsciously in the being. And as a result of that, she could close down, she could shut down, she could become more argumentative, she could become very jealous, she could become very attached. Like any variety of the spectrum of behaviors can show up. And then you've got, and she won't understand it, and John won't understand it. So now you've got this kind of a bit of a pressure cooker, because you've got Sally here who has no idea why she's feeling this way. She thought she agreed to John dating people, or maybe she didn't and she's just salty about it. Either one is possible. But the reality is it's not solving her trauma, and it's actually pressing on it. It's going to make whatever the reason is that she shut down worse. And then you've got John, who's just trying to get his needs met. And he deserves to have his needs met. He deserves to have his love languages honored. And he wants to have them honored by Sally. But that's not possible in their current reality. So he's doing the only last thing he can think of to do, which is to go to another person. And finally, he's getting potentially his needs met by that person. Now he comes home and Sally's acting weird. And he's in this space of like, damn it, I just want to get my needs met. Why is it so hard? Like, you're not happy if we're monogamous. You're not happy if I'm seeing somebody else. What is going on? And it just creates a lot of chaos in the relationship. So you can see how this can happen very honestly. And it's just resulting from people all trying to have their individual needs met and not knowing why their needs aren't being met in the first place. And so what I encourage people to do for myth number 1, if this is something that you are encouraging, first of all, take a step back. Adding another person into the mix is not a good idea if your relationship is not already super stable. If you are not coming from a solid foundation, if you put windows up, the whole thing's going to crumble when we're building a house, right? So super, super important if you are trying to consider open relating or a non-monogamous style of relationship. If you are coming from a monogamous relationship, I encourage you to ask why. Because it is never a good idea to follow myth number 1, which is to add an additional person to the mix to fix a problem in an existing relationship. It will never, never work the way you want it to. And it's not because polyamory doesn't work, it's because you do not have a solid foundation. So please, please, please take a look at your motivations. Why are you choosing to do this? And then have a conversation. If it is because needs are not being met in the relationship, is it possible that hiring a professional, looking into some therapy, looking into some counseling, at least to open the conversation and facilitate you building that foundation might help? It doesn't mean that you guys don't end up going to an open relationship or a polyamorous relationship. It just means that you need to have a little bit of support from somebody around you to help you stabilize your foundation so that that transition will be successful and in the highest good of everybody involved. Okay? Cool. Let's do number 2. Okay, myth number 2 in polyamory. Somebody always gets the short end of the stick, or somebody always loses. I've also seen this as time is finite, resources are finite. So even if love is infinite, you know, usually this comes from people saying, oh, listen, you hippies, you all think that love is infinite. I don't define myself as a hippie, but this is the way it usually comes in my awareness anyways. Oh, you hippies, you all think that love is infinite and time is not infinite and resources aren't infinite. So even if your love is infinite, you're going to have to choose at some point. And that implies that somebody is always going to have to lose. What I don't love about this one is that also implies that all relationships need to be equal. And the beauty of a polyamorous or an open relating, or in my perspective, a new paradigm relationship, and if you need a little bit of help on those 3 definitions, in the description below, I do a video where I describe all of the differences and kind of where they land for you. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, check that video out in the description down below. that assumes that everybody needs to be treated equally. That assumes that if I have two partners, one on the left and one on the right, both partners must get equal amounts of my time. Or if that is not the case, or equal amounts of investment. And if that's not the case, then partner A must be a primary and they get the most time, and partner B must be a secondary and they get the least amount of time. And so there's all of these rules that we kind of equate when we think, oh, somebody always loses or there's not enough time for everybody. That assumes that everybody wants to be treated in the exact same way or have a very specific set of rules. And while yes, that does work for some people, it is not a fair assumption that that works for everybody or that is the majority of polyamorous relationships. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. One of the most beautiful things about polyamorous relationships and open relating and new paradigm relationships is that they're fluid. They are designed for fluidity, and especially the new paradigm relationships in particular, I notice tend to have the least amount of rules. So they tend to have an agreement of certain boundaries and certain expectations between either a primary and sometimes not even that. But it's very fluid. It's very who flows into my energy today and how does my energy feel? And do I feel that I want to relate with that person? Yes or no? It is not based on even necessarily love or necessarily sexual attraction or necessarily long-term commitment or necessarily short-term commitment. Because the reality is that in a new paradigm relating premise, everybody gets to have their individual desires met in that moment. So it's not necessarily about, oh, I always want to be monogamous. It's about, today I feel like being in a triad. And if that is available, then great. So it's a very fluid dynamic, and that allows every person to be supported by the relationship or relationships or interactions as in exactly the way that they desire to be. So there's none of this needing to have a rule, needing to have a story. It gets out of the head completely and drops you fully into your body. What is alive in your body in this moment, and how is that going to relate to the people in your environment? That's really how new paradigm relating shows up. Now, in polyamorous and open relating situations, it is very common that you are going to see a variety of different sets of rules, and all of those are going to be structured based on what works for the individuals within that container. So whether it's monogamous or a primary or anything else, the beauty of all of these types of non-monogamous relationships is that you get to choose. All parties in the relationship get to choose. You get to choose what works for you. You get to choose what doesn't work for you. You get to have some boundaries in place or not. But even that in itself is a choice. And when we come from that space, everybody is able to have a pleasing encounter energetically, and everybody is able to, quote unquote, have their needs met. Even if that means that one person only sees you once a month for an afternoon and the other person lives with you. So this idea of, somebody always loses or there's always going to be a weird power dynamic, like all of that, that's all very old paradigm thinking. And what we're doing is we're trying to take a new paradigm concept of relating and shove it into an old paradigm box. And you can imagine that often does not work very well. So my invitation to you here, for those that have heard and believe in myth number 2, is to consider that all things And so for those of you that are considering myth number 2, somebody always loses, resources are finite, time is finite, even if love is infinite, I encourage you to take a step back and consider, what is it that an open relationship would look like to me that is nourishing? How could I make this easy? How could I make it flowing? How could I make it feel good without the rules? What if I just threw all the rules away? What would look good to me? And then you can have your partner, if you have one, go through the same experience, and then you two can have a conversation about it. And maybe it looks like having a formal contract or a formal relationship. Maybe it looks like having a don't ask, don't tell type setup. There's lots of different options of how this can actually manifest in your reality when we come from the premise of, I want to check in with my being to see what feels good for me, what boundaries do I need, what limits do I genuinely have, and how do I want someone else to show up for me? And then how can I turn that into a nourishing, easeful, flowing relationship with one or more people? Okay. Myth number 3. That's not 3. Myth number 3. Myth number 3, poly people are always open to sexual and dating advances. Anyone who has had the word poly on any dating profile or social media profile ever has probably noticed this trend. That you could be off, there's something about the word poly that means like you can be off not engaging with somebody at all in any way, shape, or form, and then all of a sudden, boom, somebody slides into your DM, sees that you're poly, and just assumes that you want to fuck. Why is that? What is it about that? I don't get this one, to be honest with you guys. I struggle with it. I don't understand why, because somebody is poly, you would assume that means that A, that poly relationship looks and functions a certain way, B, that they're always going to be energetically available for advances, and C, let's stick with just 2. I lost the third one. So let's just stick with those 2, okay? And it's funny because as a woman, when I was younger, going out to the bars, it was really common for me to claim that I had a boyfriend or sometimes even a girlfriend, just to keep the advances from being so overwhelming that I couldn't enjoy my time. So it's interesting because we've actually societally set up this expectation that if I don't have a boyfriend, I'm fair game. You please throw all of your sexual energy at me. I would love that. And I think what's happened when we have the poly label is that we've removed that barrier that says, I'm taken, I have a boyfriend, you must leave me alone. Now it's like, maybe I have a boyfriend, maybe I have a girlfriend, maybe I have multiples of both. But either way, the doors are open because there isn't that barrier there. And if this is resonating with you, I encourage you, I implore you, I beg you, please go back to treating the woman you are interested in, or the man. Please go back to treating the individual that you are interested in as a human being, not as a piece of meat. And go through and do the honesty to try to get to know them. Guys, this is part of the fun. This is part of the allure. It isn't just about sliding into my DMs and assuming that I want to rent a hotel room with you. It is about, hey, how are you? I saw that you are interested in sports, spirituality, whatever it is. Here's how I'm interested in that. Try to build a relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely going to be some people that are going to love that type of energy, but it is unfair to assume that every single person who has a poly label outwardly is going to be receptive to your advances, especially if they're holding a very aggressive sexual energy. So please go back to relating with somebody, getting to know them. Just because they have a poly label somewhere does not mean that they don't want to enjoy getting to know you. And it doesn't mean maybe they're in a closed triad. That's still technically poly, right? Maybe they're in a closed polycule. Again, still poly. That does not mean that they want an advance from you. And even if they are open, they probably don't want an advance like that. So please, 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 if you are someone that has done this, I encourage you to consider treating the person you are reaching out to as someone that you want to relate to. Get to know them. Be interested in getting to know them. Ask them about their day. Just spend time genuinely caring about them, and then you get to see if that guard is up or down. It will come up naturally in conversation. I promise you. Quote. Myth number 4. People who are poly don't get jealous. Well, I can tell you that I have most certainly spent my fair share of time being and feeling jealous. And my partner has been and felt jealous. And lots of people that I know in the poly community have been and felt jealous. So where does this come from? My belief is that this comes from the perception that if I'm in a monogamous relationship and I look at somebody that's poly, I assume, because I know if I saw someone with my partner, that I would feel jealous. And that would be so overwhelming to me that I wouldn't be able to function. It would be very detrimental to my mental health and to the relationship. And therefore, I assume that somebody that's in a polyamorous relationship that's involved in this environment all the time must just not feel jealous, because I'm very uncomfortable holding jealousy in my body. My relationship to jealousy is a little bit out of balance, and as a result, I assume that if I can't handle it, nobody else can handle it, and therefore these people must just magically not feel it. The flip side of this is people saying, oh, I'd be interested in the poly lifestyle, but I think I would get too jealous for it, right? So we see that one as well. What this really looks like, or what we can really do with this, is when we start to look at it, for example, I'll use myself, I definitely do feel jealousy. And I do not let it control me. Just like any other emotion, you must learn to safely and effectively work with emotions in your body, because no emotion gets to control you, whether that is anger, whether that is rage, whether that is sexual attraction, whether that is love, whether that is sadness, whether it is grief, whether it is jealousy, or any of the wonderful, blissful feelings in between. Emotions are data points. They are energy in motion through your body. They are information telling you about something that is going on subconsciously or in the body. So it's just a piece of information. Where we get into trouble is where we become our emotions, right? So we've seen lots of examples of people having healthy anger. And then we've seen unhealthy anger, what we would call rage, road rage, things like that. Somebody that cannot hold anger in their being, they become the anger and then they lash out because of it. We see this with sadness. We see this even with joy, which can turn into what we would call mania, right? So all emotions can have a positive and a negative polarity, an imbalance and an out of balance. Jealousy is exactly the same thing, and not a single human that feels emotions is able to avoid it. It is a natural part of the human existence. If you feel emotions, jealousy is just part of the mix. The difference is how we relate to our experience of jealousy. So when I feel a contraction of jealousy in my body, instead of becoming jealousy or allowing that to become rage or anger or sadness or fear, I'm able to hold it in my body. And this is where we do a lot of somatic training with my clients, but I'm able to hold it in my body and not tell stories about it, not make it mean something, but just get curious about it. What was I doing right before the jealousy hit? Right before. Because that is going to give me a lot of information. And 9 times out of 10, it is coming up because it is telling me there's an experience somebody else is having that I desire to have. And because I don't have that in my awareness, I'm feeling jealous. And that could be from somebody driving a car that I want, or going on a vacation that I desire, or doing something with a partner that I would like to do, either to that person or have that person do to me, or somebody else do to me, right? It doesn't really matter. It's just the idea is there's an activity happening in my awareness that I actually long for on some level. And because I don't have it, I experience the feeling of jealousy. And so what a gift jealousy actually is. We get to experience that feeling of jealousy and know that it is giving us a little hint of something that we want in our lives and we want to call into our awareness that just isn't there yet. And isn't that a beautiful data point for you to have a fuller, more enriching life? So the next time you have the experience of jealousy, I encourage you to feel into it, get curious about what happened right before that, and instead of letting jealousy become you, using it as a data point to create a fuller life for yourself. Okay, we've got one more, and we actually have 2 more because I have a surprise 6th tip. So number 5. Myth number 5. Poly people are just not secure, stable, emotionally balanced enough to have a monogamous relationship. So this one often comes from when we see poly people that are, solo poly would be the easiest way to explain it, that are popping around from partner to partner and that are in a very non-committal, even long-term, even if it's poly, style relationship. And that really works for them. And what can happen is that we get this premise that if you were just more emotionally stable, or if you were just more balanced, or if you were just more confident or more secure or knew what you wanted in life, you would obviously want a monogamous relationship. And that puts on the assumption that monogamy is superior to polyamory. And the only reason you don't have the superior one is because you're somehow broken and therefore you cannot access it. And that's kind of shitty, right? So what we really want to do is get into the space where polyamorous relationships and monogamous relationships are actually just different flavors of the same ice cream, which is very true because they are. They're both just different ways that you get to relate to the people in your life that are important to you. This is one way, this is another way, right? Different set of rules, that's okay. It doesn't mean that only broken people end up in monogamy or only broken people end up in polyamory. I can tell you based on my work that there are people that have traumas and work to do in both ends of the spectrum. Now, one thing I will say is that this myth number 5, does have a little iota of truth that does also apply to a monogamous relationship. But there is something to be said for what we learn about ourselves when we are willing to go to a certain depth in a relationship. Now, this does not mean that poly individuals and that poly relationships do not have depth. That is absolutely not true. But one trend that I have seen is that some individuals that have a lot of emotional that are requiring a lot of emotional processing tend to flit around from relationship to relationship. And it almost looks, if you guys have watched my video on spiritual bypassing, or is it intuition versus ego, grab that link down below if you are curious about that one. But really what it can look like is almost like relationship spiritual bypassing. So what can happen is we get into relation with somebody. I'm gonna get sock puppets or like dolls or something. I think stick figures, something would have been easier than just hands, right? Yeah, we'll get on that. We'll find something. But anyways, you've got two people, and let's say this person is, we'll use Sally and Johnny, and that was easy. We've got Sally over here, and now we've got John over here. And they are both polyamorous, and they are coming together into a relationship. What can happen is that we eventually will trigger each other. Every relationship. That's literally the purpose of why we're here. You will trigger each other. That's okay. That's what's meant to happen. Now, in a monogamous relationship, the container around these two individuals is such that they are going to be forced on at least some level to do a little bit of working about those triggers. Like either they're going to do a little bit of work, or somebody's going to shut down, or the relationship is going to break up, right? That's just the reality of it. But at some point, probably in a monogamous relationship, there's going to be a little bit of work done here, because at some point they're going to realize that one person shutting down or an explosive fight or the relationship breaking down is not viable. And so the concept of a monogamous container holds them so that they can do a little bit of their inner work, so that they can do a little bit of the healing that their soul came here to do. Now, what can happen in a polyamorous relationship is there's less of a container there, right? It's very fluid, this container. It's not structured really at all, if you can even call it a container sometimes. And because of that, it's very easy for these two to just separate. You triggered me, I just don't want to be around you. And what happens in that situation is that you're actually losing the opportunity to learn from this other person. You're losing the opportunity, like these two souls have come together karmically for some type of lesson. There's a reason these two souls have come together. There's something that needs to transpire. And when we're not being held in a container that encourages a little bit of that friction and growth, we're able to just opt out. And just to be clear here, I'm not saying that this does not happen in monogamous relationships, because it absolutely does. It's just a little bit more frequent in polyamorous relationships because we lack the container, the structure to hold these two together when things get tough and when they get a little rocky. So it happens in both, but it definitely can show up more in a polyamorous relationship. And these two just separate. And just like spiritual bypassing, where we get into the state of, this doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel in alignment, so I'm just not going to do it, instead of getting curious about why it doesn't feel in alignment and using that as an opportunity to grow, to transcend, and to increase your vibrational resiliency. The same thing is happening in a relationship. Something doesn't feel good, and we're stepping away. We're saying, this relationship doesn't feel good anymore. It's not worth it. I'm going to put my energy elsewhere. And maybe I already have somebody else that I can put that energy into. And so you end up kind of bouncing around back and forth and never really learning the lesson that you needed to learn. Now, this is not to continue to debunk the myth. This person's not mature, they're not confident, they're not secure. It just means that they have not taken the opportunity to learn the lesson. What's cool about this, or unique about this, is that we know that the universe will continue to provide you that lesson over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until you learn it, sometimes in increasing severity. So if you don't learn the lesson with John, if Sally doesn't learn the lesson with John, then she might be presented an opportunity to learn it with Bob. And if she doesn't learn it with Bob, then she might have the opportunity to learn it with Sarah. If she doesn't learn it with Sarah, she might have the opportunity to learn it with Jessica, right? And so we kind of ping pong back and forth to learn this one lesson. Same thing happens in monogamous relationships, you guys. We ping pong back and forth just with the same partner instead of a different one to learn the same lesson. Eventually, the goal here, because our souls are here to ascend, to evolve, eventually you learn the lesson and you go to the next level. And then there's a new lesson waiting for you. You never get out of lessons. It's like a video game without a boss. It makes no sense. So there's always new lessons to learn. But what happens when we're bypassing, and whether we're in a monogamous or a polyamorous relationship, if we're not doing the work when these triggers come up, we're literally just ping-ponging ourselves back and forth because we cannot avoid the lesson. It will come for us. We will learn it one way or the other. The question is, how many times do you need to go back and forth before you learn it? Okay? So again, this does not mean that people that are poly are not stable or not confident or not emotionally secure enough to have a monogamous relationship. It simply means that different strokes for different folks. Monogamy and polyamory are the same coin, just two different sides. One is not better than the other. And as long as we can allow ourselves to do the work that is coming up in our triggers, whether in a monogamous or a poly relationship, we're going to have a very fulfilling life. And last one, a bonus tip number 6. I see this one all the time. A myth number 6. Poly relationships always fail. I hear that one all the time. And there's a few things I have to say about this one. Number 1, I would love for us to define what success means. What is a successful relationship to you? Because right now, a successful relationship is defined based on monogamous standards for most people. A successful relationship is a relationship where both people are, living in this house that they own together, and they've got 1.8 children, and they've got a 401k, and, right? This is what we consider a successful relationship. And so therefore, by definition, every polyamorous relationship is probably not going to achieve that because it doesn't even fit into the definition. Like, it's literally not possible. So we need to redefine our premise of success. We also need to redefine our expectations of a relationship. Right now, because we are living in this monogamous paradigm, we are seeing that relationships have a function of pair bonding, and that is it. And the new paradigm asks you to consider that relationships have a function of mutual growth, mutual evolution, mutual understanding. And when we come from that frame of every single person in our life is here to teach us a lesson, whether that's one and we go through life together with it, or whether each time we meet a person, we learn one lesson and we go, but it creates a sense of impermanence. We can be comfortable with the premise of impermanence in a relationship because we've let go of our white knuckle grip that a relationship must be until death do us part. Instead, we can say this relationship is here for as long as it serves both of our personal evolutions. And as soon as that ends, whether that is in a day, a year, or 10 years, or 100 years, then that's when we can easily release. And there's no hurt feelings, there's no trauma. It's simply that the purpose of this relationship has come to its conclusion. This chapter has now closed. And when we look at it that way, we can see almost every relationship we've ever been in as successful. And the reality is, if we look at most monogamous relationships, even under the standard monogamous definition of success, I mean, how many people do you know that either haven't been married or on their second or third marriage or have had multiple separations? I really just think this standard idea of monogamy, of what a successful relationship looks like based on monogamous principles, does not serve anybody. It doesn't serve even the monogamous relationship structure any longer. So I think it's time we just throw that one in the trash and we start to look at, how can this relationship serve me? How can I flourish? How can my partners potentially flourish based on my energetic involvement in their lives? And when we come from that, we see that literally every single interaction and every single relationship we have is a positive, fulfilling one that helps us towards our evolution and our growth. So that's all I've got for you guys today. I hope these 6 myths towards poly myth busting were helpful for you. Again, I'm Stephanie J, the Erotic Alchemist. Super grateful to have you in my space. And as always, please help other people find this video and this amazing content by giving me a like, hitting subscribe, and sharing it with somebody you love. Thank you so much, everyone. I can't wait to see you in the next video.